The church bells tolled low and slow, like an old heart remembering how to beat. Each note sank into my chest until I could barely breathe. I stood there, in a black dress that didn't quite fit anymore, staring at the mahogany casket draped in lilies. My husband Raymond had always hated lilies. He said their scent reminded him of endings. I guess, in a way, he was right. People came up to me with soft voices and watery eyes, murmuring words like, "He's in a better place, and he loved you so much, Lillian." I nodded, smiled faintly, and let their sympathy wash over me like rain on stone. It didn't soak in. Nothing could. Not today. And then she appeared. Vanessa. Her red dress slashed through the sea of black like a wound that refused to close. I could hear the faint click of her heels against the marble floor. Deliberate, sharp, unapologetic. Some heads turned. Others whispered. But she didn't care. Vanessa never cared about what people thought, especially me. She walked right up to the casket, her chin lifted high, and laid a single white rose on top. I wondered if she knew lilies were his least favorite, or if she just wanted to make sure her flower stood out. Her voice, low and sugar-coated, cut through the hush of the chapel. "Goodbye, Ray," she said softly, then looked at me with that smirk she always wore when she knew she was being watched. He deserved someone who understood him. A few gasps rippled through the pews. My hands trembled, but I clasped them tightly before anyone could see. Raymond's sister, Judith, stepped closer to me, whispering under her breath, "Don't give her the satisfaction, Lillian. She's just trying to get a reaction." But Vanessa had already turned away, her perfume lingering where she'd stood, a scent of cheap sweetness and pride. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her how she dared show her face here, in front of his family, his friends, his wife. But instead, I just closed my eyes and breathed. Because Raymond would have hated a scene, and even in death, I was still trying to honor him. After the service, as we filed out into the soft drizzle outside, I saw Vanessa again this time, laughing with someone near the cemetery gates. Laughter at a funeral. Her lipstick didn't even smudge when she smiled. I tightened my grip on my clutch, feeling the letter inside. Raymond's handwriting on the envelope had faded slightly, but the words were still clear. To my beloved Lillian, to be opened after the service. I hadn't read it yet. I couldn't. I wasn't ready. As the rain began to fall harder, Judith offered to drive me home, but I shook my head. "I'll walk," I said quietly. "I need the air." She hesitated but didn't argue. Everyone grieves differently, and she knew I needed solitude more than company. The cemetery path was muddy, the grass heavy with dew and tears. I paused by the grave before they lowered the casket, touching the polished wood one last time. "Goodbye, Ray," I whispered. "You were many things, not all of them good, but you were mine." A flicker of guilt passed through me as I said it, because I knew. Deep down, I had known for years about Vanessa. Not everything, of course, but enough to recognize the shift in his eyes when her name came up. Enough to know that some nights, his late work wasn't really work at all. I'd chosen silence because confronting it felt like losing him. And I wasn't ready to lose him until life made that decision for me. When I finally reached home, the house felt larger, emptier. Raymond's study door was slightly ajar, the faint scent of his cologne still lingering in the air. His favorite chair sat by the window, untouched, like it was waiting for him to return. I sank into it and took out the letter. My fingers hesitated before breaking the seal. The paper inside was thick, neatly folded, and smelled faintly of cedar. Raymond's handwriting was steady, deliberate. "My dear Lillian, if you're reading this, I suppose I'm already gone. I can't imagine how hard this must be for you, and I won't pretend I made things easy. You've always had more grace than I ever deserved. There are things you need to know, truths I can't take with me. Please, go to Harold tomorrow. He has my will, and he'll explain everything. I've made mistakes, but I hope that in the end I've made something right. Raymond. I read it twice, maybe 3 times. Each word seemed to carry a hidden weight, like there was more between the lines than on them. Harold was Raymond's lawyer, a kind man in his 60s with a quiet voice and a habit of polishing his glasses whenever he was nervous. But what could possibly be in that will that would explain everything? I folded the letter back into the envelope and set it on the table. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. The house creaked as if responding to it. For the first time since his death, I felt something stir inside me. Not grief, not anger, but something sharper. A question. What had Raymond done? And why did I get the uneasy feeling that Vanessa already knew? That night, I barely slept. The clock ticked loudly in the silence, marking every minute like a drumbeat leading me towards something I couldn't see. I kept replaying her words at the church. He deserved someone who understood him. It wasn't grief that made her smirk like that, it was confidence. She thought she'd won something. But Raymond's letter said otherwise, and tomorrow, when the will was read, I would finally find out what my husband had left behind besides lies and a lover in a red dress. Morning came, gray and heavy. As if the sky itself had attended the funeral and still hadn't recovered. The rain had stopped, but the air smelled like wet earth and endings. I dressed in silence, a plain black dress. No jewelry, no makeup. The mirror showed a face I barely recognized. Hollow eyes, flat mouth. A woman who had once been a wife, but was now something else. At 9 sharp, I arrived at Harold Bennett's office. His building was one of those old-fashioned ones downtown, with creaking floors and the faint scent of paper and polish. The receptionist, a kind young woman named Elise, offered a sympathetic smile. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said softly, "Mr. Bennett is expecting you. They're already inside." For a second, I thought she meant Judith. But when I stepped into the paneled conference room, I froze. Vanessa was there. She sat at the far end of the table, her red coat draped elegantly over the chair, a smug tilt to her chin. The audacity of her being there hit me like cold water. "Good morning, Lillian," she said, crossing one leg over the other. "I wasn't sure you'd come." I didn't answer. I just took the seat opposite her, close enough to see the faint shimmer of satisfaction in her eyes. Harold looked uncomfortable, his hands fiddling with the papers in front of him. "Thank you both for coming," he began, clearing his throat. "I know this is difficult, but Mr. Whitmore left very clear instructions regarding his estate. If you'll bear with me, I'll read it in full." Vanessa smirked. "Oh, please do. I've been dying to hear what Ray had to say." The way she used his name, Ray, made my stomach twist. That was our name, not hers. But I said nothing. I just folded my hands and listened. Harold adjusted his glasses, his voice low and steady as he began to read. "This is the last will and testament of Raymond Thomas Whitmore. To my wife, Lillian Grace Whitmore, I leave the house on Eastwood Drive, all joint savings, and my personal effects. To my sister Judith, I leave the family heirlooms and jewelry. To Vanessa Claire Rowan," I felt my heart pause. Vanessa leaned forward slightly, lips curving in anticipation. "I leave the contents of the safe deposit box at Hanover Bank to be opened in the presence of both parties." Her smile widened. She thought it was money. It was always money with her. But Harold didn't stop there. Lastly, I ask that this will be read in full, including the addendum enclosed, before any assets are claimed or distributed. He unfolded another sheet of paper, this one handwritten. To my wife and to Vanessa, I owe both of you truths I never had the courage to speak aloud. Lillian, you gave me years of loyalty I didn't deserve. Vanessa, you gave me excitement that never lasted. I was a weak man, and I hurt you both in different ways. What I leave behind is not just property, but clarity. Open the deposit box, and you will understand. Harold set the paper down gently, his expression unreadable. That concludes the will's main section. The box can be opened today, if both of you are agreeable. I nodded slowly. Let's finish this. Vanessa tilted her head, pretending nonchalance. Fine by me. The drive to Hanover Bank was quiet except for the hum of the rain starting up again. Vanessa rode with Harold. I followed in my car. The world outside blurred into gray streaks through the windshield. Every streetlight reflected like a fading memory. When we arrived, the bank manager escorted us to a small private room in the back. The box was brought out, a dull steel rectangle with Raymond's initials etched in the corner. Harold turned the key with care and opened it. Inside was a single, thick envelope, sealed in wax. My name and Vanessa's were written side by side on the front. He broke the seal, unfolded the contents, and began to read aloud. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and there's nothing left to hide. Vanessa, I know what you wanted from me: security, recognition, a promise I could never keep. I told you things in weakness that I regret deeply. And Lillian, you deserve the truth, even if it comes too late. I could feel Vanessa stiffen beside me. Her nails clicked against the table. The money you believed I hid, Vanessa, was not for you. It was for my son, a child I never met, but one you claimed was mine. After verifying the truth, I discovered he was not. The accounts have been closed, and what remains I've placed under Lillian's name. She will decide what becomes of it. A soft, strangled sound escaped Vanessa's throat part. Gasp, part fury. You told me you loved me, she whispered. Harold continued reading. Love without honesty is just another form of cruelty. And Lillian, I know this revelation will wound you too, but I could not leave this world letting deceit survive me. Whatever I took from you, years, peace, trust, I hope this final act gives some back. The room was silent. The sound of the rain outside was louder than our breathing. Vanessa's face had lost its color. Her lips trembled as she stared at the letter. He's lying, she hissed suddenly, turning toward me. He's lying to make me look like the villain. I looked at her, calm but cold. You don't need his letter for that. Her hand slammed against the table. No, you think you've won, don't you? I stood slowly, clutching the letter against my chest. No, Vanessa. There are no winners here, just people finally seeing what they refused to before. Harold cleared his throat softly. There's a final line, he said, eyes flicking to the bottom of the page. Vanessa froze. I could see her chest rising and falling, shallow, fast. Harold's voice lowered. And to whoever reads this last, remember, truth is the only thing that outlives us. In the end, lies bury themselves. Vanessa's hand dropped from the table. Her skin had gone pale. She turned her face away, unable to meet my eyes. For the first time since the funeral, I felt a strange stillness inside me. Not joy, not revenge. Just peace like a storm finally breaking. Raymond's words had done what I never could, made her face the truth. And somewhere, I imagined, he was finally facing his own. For a long moment after Harold's voice faded, no one moved. The air in that little bank room felt heavy, thick with silence and the ghosts of things unsaid. I watched Vanessa's hand tremble against the table, her knuckles white. It was strange. I'd imagined this moment for years, if it ever came. The day she'd finally be stripped of her smugness, her practiced charm. But seeing her like that, pale and shaking, didn't bring the satisfaction I expected. Instead, it felt like watching someone drown slowly, silently, in the tide of their own choices. She rose abruptly, her chair scraping across the tile. "He's not telling the truth," she muttered, pacing. "He wanted to punish me. That's all this is. He couldn't stand losing control, even in death." Harold folded the letter neatly. "Miss Rowan," he said gently, "Mr. Whitmore provided documentation for every claim made in this statement. Paternity results, bank transfers, even the withdrawal dates. I verified them myself before the will was filed." Vanessa stopped pacing. Her eyes flashed toward me. "You must be loving this," she spat. "Your perfect little revenge story." I met her gaze, steady and tired. "Revenge isn't peace, Vanessa. You wouldn't understand that." Her lips trembled. "He promised me everything," she whispered. "He said he was leaving you." "Then you should have asked him when." The words slipped out before I could stop them, not cruelly but softly, like a truth that had waited too long to breathe. She stared at me for a moment longer, then grabbed her coat and stormed out. The door slammed, and the echo lingered. Harold sighed and adjusted his glasses. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore. I know this can't be easy." I nodded slowly. "Thank you, Harold. It's more than I expected." He gave a small, sympathetic smile. "Raymond may have been flawed, but he wanted you to have closure. Sometimes that's the last mercy people can offer." Closure. The word sounded neat, simple, like something you could fold up and put away in a drawer. But grief isn't paperwork. It lingers. It breathes. As I stepped outside, the rain had stopped again. The air smelled of wet pavement and clean beginnings. I stood there for a while, feeling the cold drops left on the iron rail beneath my hand. I thought of all the nights I'd waited up for Raymond, pretending not to notice how late it was. The excuses, the small lies wrapped in tenderness. I used to tell myself that love meant understanding, forgiveness. Now I knew it meant something else entirely: truth, even when it hurts. That night, I sat in his study again, reading through old photographs and letters. Raymond and I, on our wedding day, young, foolish, believing forever was something you could promise. Letters he'd written me early in our marriage, his words full of devotion and hope. Somewhere along the way, he'd lost that part of himself. Maybe we both had. I reached for the letter again, the one from the safe deposit box, and read the line that haunted me most. "Whatever I took from you, years, peace, trust, I hope this final act gives some back." It wasn't redemption, not really. But maybe it was something close. The phone rang, startling me. I hesitated before picking it up. "Lillian Whitmore?" a woman's voice asked. "This is Dr. Amos from St. Gertrude's Clinic. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Raymond Whitmore." My heart skipped. "What about him?" "There was a request in his final documents for you to receive a sealed file from our office," she said. "Would you be able to pick it up tomorrow morning?" A sealed file? Another secret. Another fragment of him waiting to surface. "Yes," I said softly. "I'll be there." After I hung up, I stared out the window into the dark street. Somewhere, in the silence between the raindrops and the ticking clock, I heard his voice again, not in sound, but in memory. "You always see the good in people, Lillian, even when it's not there." I whispered into the stillness. Maybe that was my mistake. The next morning, I drove to St. Gertrude's. The hospital corridors smelled faintly of disinfectant and lilies, the same scent from the funeral. The receptionist handed me a thick envelope with my name written in Raymond's handwriting. Inside, there was a short note and a single photograph. Lillian, you once asked me why I couldn't let go of certain things. The truth is, I was afraid of you seeing me for what I really was. I wanted to be better. I failed. But you deserve to know the whole story. Behind the note was a photograph Raymond standing beside a young boy, maybe 10 years old. Brown hair, wide smile. The same boy from the rumors years ago. His name is Samuel, the note continued. He's not my son by blood, but I helped raise him when his mother was struggling. When she told me he was mine, I believed her because I wanted to. I wanted a part of myself that wasn't broken. That's why I couldn't let Vanessa go. I thought I owed him something. But the truth is, it wasn't love. It was guilt. My hands shook as I held the photograph. So this was it, the ghost that had haunted our marriage. The lie that began everything. At the bottom of the letter, Raymond had written one final line. If you can, Lillian, find him. Tell him the truth. Don't let him grow up believing a lie. I sat there for a long time, staring at the boy's face. His smile was open, innocent, untouched by the mess the adults had made. Maybe Raymond was right. Maybe truth was the only thing that could outlive all this wreckage. When I walked out of the hospital, the sun had broken through the clouds for the first time in days. Light spilled across the wet pavement, soft and golden. I looked up, letting it warm my face. For the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel like a widow. I just felt human, flawed, tired, but alive. And somewhere inside that quiet acceptance, I realized something profound. Sometimes the end of love isn't tragedy. It's freedom disguised as grief. The drive to the address written on the back of the photograph felt longer than it was. Maybe it was the weight of what I was about to do, facing the living remnant of my husband's mistakes. Samuel. The name lingered in my mind as the miles rolled by. A boy who had carried someone else's truth without knowing it. A boy who, according to Raymond's letter, had been told a lie about who his father was. Vanessa's son. My husband's almost son. The sky had turned a faint silver by the time I reached the small town outside Fairhaven. It was quiet, modest, narrow streets lined with old oak trees and brick houses that looked worn, but loved. I parked outside a small white cottage with peeling shutters and a rusted mailbox that read Rowan. My breath caught. So she was here. Vanessa. Of course she was. I'd imagined this confrontation 100 times since the will reading, but as I sat there gripping the steering wheel, I realized I didn't feel anger anymore, just an aching need for truth. I stepped out of the car. The air was cool, carrying the scent of wet leaves. From the porch, I could hear faint laughter inside a boy's laughter, bright and real. I hesitated before knocking. The door opened a few seconds later and Vanessa appeared. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. She looked different, smaller somehow. Her makeup was gone, her hair unkempt. There were dark circles under her eyes. "Lillian," she said flatly. "What do you want?" "I came to talk," I said softly. "About Raymond and about Samuel." Her face tightened. "You don't get to say his name?" "Maybe not," I said, "but I have something he deserves to know." She crossed her arms, blocking the doorway. "If you're here to humiliate me again..." "I'm not," I interrupted gently. "This isn't about you or me anymore. It's about him." For a moment, she stared at me, searching for some hidden cruelty. When she didn't find it, she sighed, stepping aside. "Fine. 5 minutes." Inside, the house smelled of toast and laundry detergent. It was warm, lived in nothing like the polished apartment I'd imagined she lived in before. A small table sat near the window, cluttered with books and crayons. Samuel was sitting there, drawing something. He looked up when he saw me, curious, polite, unaware. His eyes were blue, but not Raymond's shade. Lighter, softer. "Sam," Vanessa said carefully, "this is a friend of your father's." He smiled shyly. "Hi." My throat tightened. "Hi, sweetheart." He turned back to his drawing, humming to himself. Vanessa motioned for me to follow her into the kitchen. "What do you want me to say?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling now. "That I lied? That I told him Raymond was his father because I thought it would make him love me? Fine, I did. I was stupid, Lillian. I was scared." I studied her face. The woman who'd once looked so untouchable at the funeral now looked human. "Why scared?" She swallowed hard. "Because I was alone. Because his real father left before he was born. Because I thought if Raymond believed he was Sam's, he'd stay. And for a while, he did. But I could see it in his eyes. He knew. Maybe not at first, but later, he knew." Her voice broke. "He still sent money, birthdays, school. He said he couldn't be in the boy's life, but he didn't want him to go without. I hated him for that. I hated that he could care without loving me." I leaned against the counter, letting her words settle. "He asked me to find Samuel," I said quietly, "to tell him the truth." Her eyes filled with tears. "He asked you? Not me?" "He wanted honesty," I replied. "He thought maybe coming from me, it would mean something different. Maybe it was his way of making peace." She wiped her face roughly. "Peace," she muttered. "He leaves us both with the mess and calls it peace." Neither of us spoke for a long time. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Then, faintly, from the other room, Samuel's voice drifted in. "Mom, can I show her my drawing?" Vanessa's lips parted, trembling slightly. "Go ahead, sweetheart." He came running in, holding up his paper. "It's a tree," he said proudly. "And the sun. Mom says the sun always comes back, even when it rains." I smiled through the ache in my chest. "She's right." He beamed, then hurried back to his crayons. Vanessa turned away, her shoulders shaking. "What do I do now?" she whispered. "How do I tell him that the man he called Dad isn't?" I took a slow breath. "You start by not lying anymore. He's young, but he'll understand love better than we did. Tell him the truth not all at once, but gently. He deserves that." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "And what about you, Lillian? What do you want out of this?" I thought about that for a moment. "Nothing," I said finally. "Just to stop carrying what isn't mine anymore." Outside, the rain started again, soft, cleansing. When I left, Samuel waved from the window. His drawing was taped to the glass, a bright yellow sun above a crooked tree. I drove home, in silence. The road wound between fields, slick with rain, and for the first time, the world didn't feel heavy. Just quiet. Honest. At home, I placed Raymond's letters in a box. Not out of anger, but to let them rest. Some truths don't need to be carried forever. That night, I sat by the window, watching the raindrops chase each other down the glass. The house was still, but not lonely. I thought of Vanessa broken, but perhaps healing. Of Samuel, growing up without lies. Of Raymond, wherever he was, finally stripped of pretense. And I thought of myself, a woman who had spent her life clinging to something already gone. Grief, I realized, wasn't just about loss. It was about what you finally set free. As the clock chimed midnight, I whispered softly into the quiet room, "Good night, Ray. I hope you found your peace." And for the first time since the church bells tolled, I truly believed I had found mine. The morning after I visited Vanessa and Samuel, the world felt different, not brighter, but lighter. The sky was a soft shade of pearl gray, and the air carried that crisp scent only autumn brings, like endings folded gently into beginnings. I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea gone cold, staring at the envelope that had arrived in yesterday's mail. It bore Harold's neat handwriting. For Mrs. Lillian Whitmore, final documents. For a moment, I just traced the letters of my name with my thumb. I'd thought the last of Raymond's secrets had been laid to rest, but life has a way of keeping one more folded corner hidden. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a letter on cream stationery, dated a few weeks before Raymond's death. Lillian, if you're reading this, then everything else has already come to light. There is one last matter I didn't include in the will. Not because I wished to deceive, but because it isn't about money or property, it's about choice. There's a small cabin by Lake Elmer, the one we stayed in that summer you loved so much. I've transferred it into your name, quietly. You always said that place felt like home in a way no house ever did. I hope you go there again. Not for me, but for yourself. R. Lake Elmer. The name stirred 100 memories, the cabin with its ivy-covered porch, the creak of the wooden dock beneath bare feet, the sound of wind moving through pine trees like a soft hymn. I hadn't been there in over a decade. Back then, Raymond and I were still trying to save what was already slipping away. We'd argued, then made up, then sat in silence by the lake watching the water mirror the moon. I remembered him saying, "Maybe we'll come back when we're old and wiser." We never did. I folded the letter and placed it in my coat pocket. Maybe it was time. The drive took most of the afternoon. The roads twisted through forests, brushed with gold and crimson, and the closer I got, the more something inside me began to loosen a knot I hadn't even realized I was still holding. When the cabin finally came into view, it was just as I remembered. Small, weathered, but alive with the scent of cedar and lake water. I unlocked the door, and the faint creak welcomed me like an old friend. Dust floated in the afternoon light, but the furniture was still there. The same blue armchair by the window. The shelf of old books Raymond used to pretend he'd read. I set down my bag and walked to the dock. The water was still, glassy, reflecting the soft burn of the autumn sky. I sat down, dipping my hand into the cool surface. For a while, I just breathed, and then I spoke aloud, not to the air, but to him. "Ray," I said softly, "I found them. Vanessa and the boy." I told him the truth. The wind moved gently through the reeds, as if listening. "I don't know if it makes things better," I continued, "but it's done, and I'm done carrying what wasn't mine." I let the silence stretch, peaceful and vast. Then I reached into my pocket and took out a small folded paper, the photograph of Raymond and Samuel. I looked at it one last time before setting it gently on the lake's surface. The ripples spread slowly, carrying the image away until it blurred into the water. "I forgive you," I whispered, "not because you earned it, but because I need it." Something lifted inside me, then not dramatic, not cinematic. Just a quiet unburdening, the kind that happens when the heart finally exhales. I stayed at the cabin that night, built a small fire, cooked soup from the old cans still in the pantry, and wrapped myself in the worn blanket that smelled faintly of pine and smoke. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like the widow of Raymond Whitmore. I felt like Lillian again, a woman who had survived. Heartbreak, betrayal, and the quiet cruelty of silence, yet still found enough tenderness in herself to keep living. As the fire crackled, I thought about Vanessa. I wondered if she had told Samuel yet and how he'd taken it. I hoped, quietly, that she would rebuild something honest out of the ruins for her son's sake, if not her own. And then I thought of Judith Steadfast, loyal Judith who had stood by me through it all. I made a mental note to call her the next day, to invite her up here. She'd always loved the lake. Later, as I sat by the fire, I noticed something tucked beneath one of Raymond's old books, a small leather-bound journal. I opened it, and the first page made my breath catch. It was Raymond's handwriting. June 14th, Lake Elmer. Lillian fell asleep on the dock today. I don't know what I ever did to deserve her calm or why she still smiles at me after all the ways I've failed. If love is measured by patience, then she has loved me 100 lifetimes more than I've earned. My eyes blurred. I turned another page, then another. Every entry was simple fragments of thoughts, memories, guilt written without defense. And in the final entry, dated only 2 months before his death, he'd written, I've been a coward all my life, but if she forgives me, truly forgives me, then maybe I'll finally rest. I closed the journal slowly. My tears fell softly onto the page, blurring the ink. Well, I whispered through a trembling smile, you can rest now, right? Outside, the lake shimmered beneath the moonlight, calm and endless. The reflection looked almost like another world one where perhaps, somehow, we'd both done things differently. But as I watched it, I realized that maybe this was the only way it could have ever been. Some stories don't end with reunions or grand apologies. Some just end quietly in truth, in peace, in the gentle act of letting go. The fire popped softly behind me. I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of smoke and pine, feeling the warmth seep deep into my bones. Tomorrow I'd start over, maybe fix the roof, repaint the porch, plant lilies, not because Raymond hated them, but because I didn't anymore. They smelled like closure now. The next morning began softly, with sunlight spilling through the cabin's lace curtains and the sound of water lapping gently against the dock. I hadn't slept deeply, but when I opened my eyes, I felt something I hadn't in months, stillness without ache. The kettle whistled faintly on the stove as I brewed tea. I set Raymond's journal beside me on the table, its worn leather cover already comforting in my hands. His handwriting, shaky but familiar, had become something like a voice from the other side, flawed but finally honest. I thought that would be the last echo of him I'd ever need. But life, I've learned, doesn't end its lessons where you expect it to. Around mid-morning, I heard tires on gravel outside. When I stepped onto the porch, a small gray sedan was pulling up the narrow road. Judith stepped out, bundled in a wool coat, clutching a paper bag and a thermos. She smiled when she saw me. I thought I'd find you here, she said. Harold told you. Of course, he worries about you, you know? I smiled faintly. He always did. Judith's eyes softened. You look better? Different? I feel different? We went inside. I poured her tea, and she unpacked the bag, a loaf of bread, a small jar of marmalade, and a bundle of daisies she'd picked from somewhere along the road. We talked for a while about small things, how the city felt colder without him, how she was planning to move in with her daughter in the spring. But then Judith grew quiet. She glanced at the journal on the table, her fingers tracing the edge of the leather cover. You found it, she murmured. I nodded. It was under his books. She hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket and took out a letter sealed, creased, and addressed to me in Harold's handwriting. He gave this to me after the will reading, she said softly. Said it was from Raymond, but he wanted me to decide when you should have it. I didn't know if I should bring it before, but seeing you now, I think you're ready. My pulse quickened as I took the envelope. The seal was unbroken. My name, Lillian, written in Raymond's unmistakable hand. For a moment, I just stared at it, afraid of what waited inside. Then I unfolded the paper and began to read. My dearest Lillian, if you're reading this, then Judith has finally given it to you. That means you've seen the will. You've heard the truth about Vanessa, and God willing, you found the courage to forgive me. But there's one last truth I need you to know. I didn't get sick suddenly. I knew about the diagnosis months before you did. Heart failure, the doctor said. Nothing to be done. I could have told you, but I didn't. Because I didn't want you to spend my last months taking care of a man who had already taken so much from you. I wanted you to remember me walking beside you, not lying in a bed, fading away. My breath caught. I felt the edges of the paper tremble between my fingers. The day Vanessa found out, she begged me to let her stay. But even then, I knew she wasn't staying for love, she was staying for guilt. I told her to leave. I told her the truth about Samuel. I didn't tell her about my illness. I wanted to face it alone. That's the coward in me, Lillian. I didn't want you to see how afraid I was. I pressed the letter against my chest, the ink smudging beneath my tears. If I could live it all again, I would choose you. Every mistake, every detour would still lead me back to you. I don't deserve peace, but I hope you find yours. When the will is read, you'll hear the line I left for both of you about truth outliving us. I meant that for you most of all, because you lived truthfully, even when I didn't. R. The last line was written more faintly, the ink trailing off like a breath leaving his body. I sat there in silence. Judith's hand rested gently on mine, anchoring me to the present. He wanted you to have that before he died, she said softly, but he was afraid you'd see it as pity. He didn't understand how much stronger you really were. I smiled weakly through the tears. He never did. Judith exhaled, long and quiet. You know, she said, looking out the window, he told me something once. Said that if you ever forgave him, he'd die believing he'd done one good thing right. I closed my eyes. The ache that had haunted me for so long felt different now. No longer sharp, but deep and steady, like the sound of the lake against the shore. I forgave him, I whispered. I really did. Judith squeezed my hand. Then maybe he finally got his wish. We stayed that way for a while, two women bound not by tragedy anymore, but by understanding. When she left that afternoon, she hugged me tightly and said, "Don't disappear up here forever. The world still needs a bit of you in it." After she drove off, I sat on the porch, the letter beside me, watching the light fade across the lake. The water rippled softly, reflecting the sky's fading gold. I thought about how love changes shape, how it doesn't always die with betrayal or even with death. Sometimes it lingers quietly, stripped of illusion, until all that's left is something simple, memory, without bitterness. That night, I wrote my own letter not to Raymond, but to myself. Dear Lillian, you've carried grief like a duty and forgiveness like a burden. Now let them both rest. There's still time for you. Time to laugh, to rebuild, to be more than what pain made you. Truth may outlive us, but so does grace. When I finished, I folded it and tucked it inside Raymond's journal. Not for anyone else to read, just to remind myself that healing, too, deserves to be remembered. Outside, the moon rose high and bright, washing the lake in silver light. The wind brushed the water, and the reflection broke softly, like a secret finally set free. For the first time in years, I didn't whisper goodnight to him. I whispered it to myself. The weeks that followed Judith's visit unfolded like slow-moving water, still but alive beneath the surface. The days were quiet, yet full of small motions that stitched themselves into something whole again. I repaired the cabin's porch steps, planted lilies and daisies by the railing, and painted the window frames a soft shade of pale blue. It felt good to use my hands for something other than holding grief. Each morning, I walked down to the dock with a cup of tea and watched the mist drift across the lake. Sometimes the silence felt like a companion. Other times, it felt like an answer. And for the first time in years, I didn't start my day by thinking of Raymond not out of neglect, but because the part of me that belonged to him had finally found rest. One morning, as the sun pushed through the clouds in streaks of gold, I decided to drive into town. Fairhaven was small, one main street lined with red brick shops, a bakery that smelled like cinnamon, and a little art studio with paint-speckled windows. The sign out front read, "Willow and Clay Art for All Ages." Something drew me inside. The woman at the counter looked up from arranging brushes and smiled warmly. "Looking for a class?" "I'm not sure," I admitted. "It's been a while since I held a brush." She chuckled. "That's exactly the kind of person we love most. What do you like to paint?" "Things that don't talk back," I said, smiling faintly. She laughed. "We have a beginner's watercolor group on Saturdays. It's mostly locals, but we've got room for one more." And just like that, something small but vital sparked inside me curiosity, maybe even courage. I signed up. That first class felt awkward at first. The smell of paint and paper stirred memories I hadn't expected afternoons years ago when I used to sketch at the kitchen table while Raymond read the newspaper. But soon, the motion of brush against paper became its own language again. By the end of the second week, I found myself painting the lake, the water, the light, the same stillness that had once felt like loneliness, now translated into color. After class one afternoon, the studio owner approached me. "You have a calm hand," she said. "Ever thought about teaching?" "Teaching?" I laughed softly. "I'm not sure I have much to teach anyone." "You'd be surprised," she said. "You paint like someone who's lived." Her words lingered long after I left. A few days later, I got a letter handwritten in a child's uneven scrawl. The return address made my heart skip. It was from Samuel. "Dear Mrs. Whitmore, Mom told me who my real dad is. She cried a lot. I didn't understand at first, but she said Mr. Whitmore helped me even when he didn't have to. She said, you told the truth. I'm not mad. I'm glad I know. Mom's trying to get better. We planted a tree for him in our yard. She said I could write you if I wanted. Thank you for being kind to her." From Samuel. I read it twice, then a third time, tears blurring the ink. His words were simple, but they carried more grace than most adults manage in a lifetime. That evening, I walked to the dock again and sat watching the reflection of the sunset in the water. For the first time, the ache that used to sit beneath my ribs didn't feel heavy. It felt like light, soft, diffused, forgiving. I wrote back to Samuel. "Dear Samuel, thank you for your letter. Your father would be proud of you for wanting to know the truth and for being gentle about it. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes because they're afraid, not because they don't care. Your mom is brave for telling you. Be patient with her. Keep that tree growing tall. It will remind you that even after storms, roots can still hold. Mrs. Whitmore." A few weeks later, another letter came, this time in Vanessa's handwriting. I hesitated before opening it. "Lillian, I wanted to thank you. I didn't think I ever would, but I see now that your kindness saved me from myself. Samuel's doing well. He's drawing more, smiling more. I started working again, teaching art at his school, of all things. Maybe we both needed to start over. I know I hurt you more than I can ever repair. I don't expect forgiveness, but if you ever want to visit, our door is open. Vanessa." I held the letter in my lap for a long time, not crying, not shaking, just breathing. There was a time I would have torn it up. But now it felt like something else, not closure, but continuation. I didn't reply right away. I didn't need to. Some things are better left in the quiet space between understanding and goodbye. Instead, I poured myself another cup of tea, sat by the window, and began sketching. This time, I drew the lake, not as it looked, but as it felt. Layers of calm and memory. Light breaking through after long gray days. When I was done, I titled it simply, Truth Outlives Us. I brought it to the art studio the next week. The owner, delighted, hung it in the window with a small handwritten tag that read, Painted by Lillian Whitmore, a story in still water. Every time I passed by that window, I smiled. Not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. And maybe I thought, that's all any of us ever leave behind, the honest parts, the ones that still shine when everything else fades. That night, as I sat on the porch beneath a sky full of quiet stars, I whispered into the darkness, Good night, Ray. You were right, truth outlives us, but so does kindness. The wind rustled through the trees, soft as a reply. And somewhere deep inside, I felt it again, that gentle stillness that comes not at the end of a story, but at the beginning of peace. It's strange how life begins to rebuild itself quietly, like grass pushing through cracks in the pavement. One day, you wake up and realize that your grief has softened, not vanished, but transformed into something you can carry without it hurting to breathe. The art studio became my second home. Each week, I watched strangers with tired eyes and busy hands rediscover the simple joy of color. There was a woman who painted flowers because her late husband had planted roses every spring. A teenage boy who sketched old buildings because he said they didn't judge him. And me, the widow who painted the lake again and again because it reflected everything I couldn't put into words. They started calling me Miss Lillian, even though I told them not to. It stuck anyway. Then, one gray afternoon, a man walked into the studio just as I was cleaning brushes. His hair was silver, neatly combed, and he wore a dark coat that looked almost too formal for the small town quiet. He smiled politely, holding a folder under his arm. Mrs. Whitmore? He asked. Yes. My name is Alan Pierce. I was Raymond's colleague years ago. We worked together at the firm in Hartford. The sound of Raymond's name still carried a soft ache, but it no longer made me flinch. What brings you here, Mr. Pierce? He hesitated, looking at the paintings along the wall. His gaze lingered on one Truth Outlives Us. I'm sorry to intrude, he said. I was going through some of Raymond's old files recently. I found something unexpected. A letter. It was addressed to you, but never mailed. My breath caught. To me? He nodded and handed over the folder. I wasn't sure if I should deliver it, but when I saw your name mentioned in a small exhibit notice downtown, I took it as a sign. My heart beat faster as I accepted the folder. His handwriting, I would have recognized it anywhere. The sight of those familiar, slanted letters made my chest tighten. Alan gave a small nod. He spoke of you often, he said. Even when things weren't good between you, he admired you. I think he wanted to be the kind of person you thought he was. I didn't know what to say, only that a quiet warmth spread through me, a strange, bittersweet gratitude. Thank you for bringing this, I said softly. He smiled gently. Take care, Mrs. Whitmore. And with that, he left. The studio felt still after he was gone. I sat by the window, staring at the sealed envelope. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Lillian, I don't know if this letter will ever reach you, but I needed to write it anyway. You once told me that people aren't defined by what they lose, but by what they choose to rebuild. I've lost so much your trust, your laughter, the quiet way you used to rest your hand on mine when words weren't enough. But I want to rebuild something, even if you never see it. I've been setting aside a fund not for me, not for Vanessa, but for something that might last beyond the both of us. I've asked Harold to ensure it's used to support art programs for underprivileged children. You always believed that art could heal. I never understood it before. Now I do. Maybe someday a child will paint their way out of pain the way I never could. And if that happens, I'll know a piece of us lived on in something good. My throat tightened. I ran my hand across the page, feeling the grooves where his pen had pressed too hard. Even in death, he was still reaching for redemption, not through apology, but through creation. And somehow it was enough. A few weeks later, Harold called. "You'll never guess," he said, his tone brighter than I'd ever heard it. "Raymond's Art Fund, it's been approved and established. They're calling it the Whitmore Initiative. They'd like you to oversee its community branch here in Fairhaven, if you're willing." I smiled, feeling the tears before they fell. "Yes, Harold, I'd like that very much." The studio expanded. With the fund's help, we added free classes for local kids: paint, clay, paper, color. Some came from broken homes, others from grief I recognized too well. But when they painted, something in their faces changed. One afternoon, I sat beside a girl named Isla, no older than 10, who was painting a lake with soft silver strokes. "It looks familiar," I said gently. She smiled shyly. "Mom said lakes remember people. Do you think that's true?" I looked at her painting a calm stretch of water beneath an endless sky. "Yes," I whispered. "I think they do." When class ended, I lingered in the studio alone. The light through the windows turned golden, dust motes drifting like quiet ghosts. On the far wall hung "Truth Outlives Us." Beside it, I placed a new painting, one of the cabin at sunset. A woman sitting on the dock with her feet just touching the water. I titled it "Grace Remains." And as I stepped back to look at it, I realized something. Raymond's truth had rippled outward through Samuel, through Vanessa, through every child who now had a brush in hand and a story to tell. He hadn't just left behind a will. He'd left behind a choice for all of us to do something better with what remained. That night, I returned to the cabin. The air was cool, and the stars scattered across the lake like quiet witnesses. I sat on the porch, watching the moon ripple over the water. For a long time, I said nothing. I didn't need to. But somewhere in the stillness, I could almost hear him not as a ghost, but as a memory finally at rest. "You always did make beauty out of the wreckage, Lillian." I smiled softly. "Not beauty, Ray," I whispered. "Truth, and it was always there. We just didn't know how to see it." The wind stirred, carrying the faint scent of lilies across the water. I closed my eyes, feeling peace settle deep into my bones, the kind that doesn't ask for understanding, only acceptance. And for the first time, I realized that my story wasn't about loss at all. It was about learning how to live when the echo fades, how to find grace in what remains. A year passed before I realized how much life had changed. The Whitmore Initiative had grown faster than anyone expected. The old studio had been expanded into a sunlit art center by the lake, full of color, laughter, and the soft sound of brushes moving across paper. It wasn't grand or loud. It was quiet, human. The kind of place Raymond would have once overlooked, but in the end, built his legacy around. We were preparing for our first community exhibition, Reflections, the Art of Healing. The name wasn't mine. One of the students had suggested it, and it felt right. Each wall told a different story. Paintings of grief, recovery, forgiveness, and near the entrance hung two pieces side by side. Truth outlives us and grace remains. I'd almost convinced myself I was ready until I saw the names on the guest list. Vanessa Rowan, Samuel Rowan. The moment I saw them, something inside me tightened. Not fear, exactly, but the fragile anticipation that comes when the past walks toward you in the shape of a name. That evening, as the first guests arrived, the center filled with the sound of soft conversation and the hum of violin music from a local quartet. The walls glowed in warm light, and the lake shimmered through the wide glass windows like part of the exhibit itself. I greeted families, students, patrons' faces that had become part of this new chapter of mine. And then I saw them. Vanessa stood near the doorway, dressed simply in gray, her hair tied back. There were faint lines around her eyes, not from age, but from living. Beside her stood Samuel, taller now, his posture shy but confident in a way that made my throat tighten. When our eyes met, she hesitated before stepping closer. "Lillian," she said softly. "Vanessa." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt heavier than words could fill. But then she smiled faintly. "You've built something beautiful." "It wasn't just me," I said. "It was everyone who needed a second chance." Her eyes shimmered. "I wanted to come sooner, but I didn't think I had the right." "You did," I said gently. "You both did." Samuel stepped forward, holding a small wrapped parcel. "I made this," he said shyly, "for the exhibit." I unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a small canvas, a lake beneath a sky streaked with light. And on the shore, two figures, one sitting, one standing, their reflections meeting in the water. At the bottom, in careful handwriting, he'd written, "For the people who tell the truth, even when it hurts." My eyes filled before I could stop them. "It's beautiful, Samuel." Vanessa's voice trembled. "He wanted to give it to you himself." I looked at her, then really looked. And for the first time, I didn't see the woman who'd once mocked me at a funeral. I saw someone who'd been broken, like me, and had learned how to rebuild. "Would you like to hang it yourself?" I asked. Samuel nodded eagerly, and I handed him a small hook. He chose a space near the entrance, right between Truth Outlives Us and Grace Remains. It fit perfectly, as if it had always belonged there. As guests gathered around to look, Vanessa stood beside me, her arms folded loosely. "He talks about Raymond sometimes?" she said quietly. "Not as his father, but as someone who helped him understand kindness. I think that's how he remembers him." "That's enough," I said. "That's all any of us could ask for." She nodded, swallowing hard. "Do you ever think he'd be proud of this?" I smiled faintly. "I think he already is." For a while, we stood there together, two women who had once shared the same heartbreak, now sharing the same peace. Later that night, after everyone had gone, I stayed behind to tidy up. The quiet felt sacred somehow, like the closing of a prayer. I walked over to Samuel's painting and studied it again. The reflections in the water glowed softly under the dim lights, the two figures blending into the lake's gentle ripples. Beside it, I noticed something I hadn't before: a small folded note tucked behind the frame. I unfolded it. The handwriting was Vanessa's. "For all the things we ruined, thank you for helping me build something good from the pieces." I smiled through my tears. Then I took the note and placed it behind my own painting, letting the two stories rest together, unseen but not forgotten. Outside, the lake shimmered beneath the moonlight. The air was cool and the trees swayed gently in the wind. I walked out onto the dock and looked at the water, at the cabin lights reflected like small stars. For so long, I'd thought the end of my marriage was the end of my story, but standing there, I understood endings are just quiet beginnings dressed in grief. I thought of Raymond, of his letters, his guilt, his truth, and of the unlikely grace that had come after him. And for the first time, I whispered something new into the night. Thank you. The water stirred softly, as if to answer. And somewhere deep in that stillness, I could almost feel him smile. 10 years have passed since that night. By the lake, the night that passed finally folded itself into silence and became something gentler. The Whitmore Initiative has grown beyond what I could have imagined. What began as a small art studio by the water is now a network of community centers across 3 counties. Children paint, sculpt, and learn to turn their pain into color, their confusion into shape. Every building carries the same small brass plaque by the entrance. Truth outlives us. It's strange, the way time softens everything. I still live in the cabin by Lake Elmer. The porch railing is lined with flower pots now, and each spring I plant lilies, white, pink, yellow. I used to think of them as symbols of endings, but now they remind me of forgiveness. The days are slow here, tender. I spend my mornings writing letters to old friends and my evenings watching the sunset shimmer across the lake. And sometimes, when the wind moves just right, I can still hear children's laughter from the art center carried over the water. Vanessa writes occasionally. Her letters are shorter now, but filled with light. She tells me about her students, about Samuel, who's just turned 20. He's studying art therapy of all things and volunteers at one of our branches in Hartford. She writes, he says, "You taught him what truth looks like even when it hurts." Sometimes I wonder what Raymond would think if he could see it all now, the boy who carries his lessons forward, the woman he once hurt teaching others how to heal. Maybe this was the redemption he never could have found in life, the quiet transformation of pain into purpose. A few weeks ago, the initiative invited me to speak at the opening of a new center in the city. I almost said no. The thought of standing before a crowd still makes my voice tremble, but Judith convinced me otherwise. "Your story is part of this, Lil," she said over the phone. "You don't have to be loud to be heard." She was right, so I went. The building was filled with light and children's art handprints on the walls, bright skies painted by small, hopeful hands. And as I stood before them, my voice didn't shake. I told them about Raymond, not the betrayal, not the pain, but the truth. About how even the most broken choices can become something beautiful when met with honesty. About how forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's freeing yourself from being the keeper of someone else's mistakes. Afterward, a young woman approached me. She was no older than 30, her eyes bright but tired. She said she'd lost her husband the year before. "I didn't think I'd ever feel peace again," she said, "but hearing you talk about love surviving in different forms, it gives me hope." I took her hand gently. "Peace doesn't arrive all at once," I told her. "It comes in quiet moments. You'll know it when it stops hurting to remember." She smiled through her tears. "Thank you." And that was the moment I realized this. Right here was what Raymond had left me. Not money, not closure, but the ability to turn my pain into someone else's lantern. When I returned to the lake that evening, the sky was bruised with violet and gold. I stood on the dock and thought about how far I'd come from the widow trembling at a funeral, mocked and broken, to a woman who had built something that would outlive her. There are still nights when I talk to him, not in sorrow, but in conversation. "Do you see it, Ray?" I whisper sometimes. "All the lives that changed because you finally told the truth?" The water ripples softly, and I imagine his voice in the wind. "You always knew how to find the light, Lillian." I smile when I hear it real or imagined. It doesn't matter. Because in some way he's right. The light was always there. I just had to stop waiting for someone else to bring it back. Judith visits on weekends. We drink tea, laugh over old stories, and sit by the fire when it rains. She says I've turned the cabin into a sanctuary not just for me, but for everyone who steps through its door. Maybe she's right. Maybe that's the real legacy, not the art, not the centers, not even the truth that outlived us, but the peace that came after. The other day I received a letter in handwriting I didn't recognize. It was from one of Samuel's students. Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Rowan told us about the Whitmore Initiative and how it started because of you. He said it began with a story about truth, love, and forgiveness. I just wanted to say it's helping me. I'm painting again. Thank you. I folded the letter and placed it beside the first one Samuel had sent me years ago, the one about planting the tree. That tree must be tall by now. I think of it often, how roots grow deeper than we ever see, and how what we plant in pain can still blossom in kindness. Tonight, the lake is still. The stars tremble across the water like distant candles. I sit on the porch, wrapped in an old shawl, listening to the frogs and crickets sing their quiet hymn. There's an unfinished painting on my easel, the lake again, but this time the reflection isn't of the cabin. It's of people, dozens of faint figures standing by the shore, each holding a light. I think I'll call it what remains after truth. And when I'm gone, I hope someone finds it, just like I once found Raymond's letters and understands what it meant. That love, even when fractured, can still illuminate. That forgiveness is not the end of pain, but the beginning of grace. And that sometimes the most powerful will isn't the one written in ink, but the one written in how we choose to live after. I close my eyes as the breeze brushes against my cheek, warm and soft. "Good night, Ray," I whisper. "Thank you for the truth." The water stirs gently. The stars hold their shimmer, and for a long, quiet moment, everything feels whole. The years have begun to feel shorter now. I notice it in the quiet spaces, the time it takes for the kettle to boil, the slow fade of sunlight across the floorboards, the way my hands linger longer on old letters before I fold them away again. Age is a tender companion. It doesn't ask for permission. It simply sits beside you and reminds you that you've lived. The cabin has grown softer with time. The paint has peeled in places, but I don't mind. It feels honest that way, weathered, but still standing. On the mantel, next to a vase of lilies, rests a framed photo from last spring's Whitmore Initiative gathering. Children covered in paint and laughter. Vanessa smiling genuinely this time. Judith beaming proudly beside me. And Samuel taller now, with the same calm energy Raymond used to have when he was younger, before life hardened him. He visits often, bringing sketches and stories from his work at the art centers. He's made something beautiful of his life, thoughtful, gentle, grounded. And every time I see him, I can't help but think that he's the best proof I have that truth heals across generations. This morning, I woke before dawn. The lake was wrapped in mist, the world still half asleep. I made tea and sat by the window, watching the first light spill over the water. The ache in my chest has grown more frequent these past months. I know what it is. The same quiet calling Raymond must have felt near the end. But I'm not afraid. I've lived long enough to understand that endings are just a return, a circle closing softly. I've written a letter for Samuel. It sits on the table beside me, sealed with a blue ribbon. He'll find it when the time comes. For now, I just want to write this last entry, one more reflection before I go. If anyone ever reads these words, know this. Forgiveness isn't something you do once. It's something you keep choosing every day until your heart learns how to rest again. Raymond's truth set me free, but it was my own grace that kept me alive. The past never truly leaves us. It lingers in the way we love, the way we listen, the way we choose to be kind even when it's hard. If I could tell the woman I was years ago, the one standing at that funeral, shaking under the weight of betrayal, I'd tell her this: you'll survive. Not because time will erase the pain, but because one day you'll look back and see that even the breaking was part of your becoming. I close the journal softly. The pages are worn, ink smudged in places from tears long dried. But every word is a piece of truth, gathered from a life that refused to stay bitter. Outside, the light shifts the mist thinning, the sky blooming gold. The lilies sway in the soft breeze, their fragrance sweet and faint. I take one more slow breath and whisper to the morning, I'm ready. And for the first time in years, I feel Raymond's presence not as memory, but as warmth, quiet, patient, waiting. 3 months later, Samuel's perspective. The cabin was just as she'd left it, neat, sunlit, full of quiet. The air smelled faintly of tea leaves and lilies. I stood by the door for a long time before stepping inside. Judith had called me 2 days earlier, her voice soft but steady. She passed in her sleep, she'd said, peacefully, by the lake. I believed her. Lillian had always done things gently, even goodbyes. The letter was on the table, tied with a blue ribbon. My name written in her graceful script. I sat down and opened it carefully, my hands trembling. My dear Samuel, if you're reading this, then my story has finally reached its end, or rather its beginning somewhere else. You once told me you wanted to help people find peace through art. That is a gift worth carrying. I leave the cabin to you. Let it be what it was for me, a place where truth finds rest. Plant lilies each spring. Let their scent remind you that even the hardest stories can bloom again. I've watched you grow into a man of kindness. Remember, Samuel, truth is not a weapon, it's a light. Use it to heal, not to wound. With love, Lillian. The paper blurred as I read it, my tears falling quietly onto her words. Outside, the lake shimmered endless, calm. The same lake she'd painted over and over, as if it held every version of her. I walked down to the dock, her letter pressed to my chest. The lilies by the porch had already begun to bloom, white petals opening toward the morning sun. I sat where she must have sat on her last day, the boards warm beneath me, the wind soft against my skin. She had been more than a teacher. She'd been proof that broken people could become beacons for others, that forgiveness wasn't weakness, it was legacy. From my pocket, I pulled a small wooden carving I'd made years ago, 2 hands releasing a bird. I placed it gently on the dock and whispered, "Thank you, Miss Lillian." The water lapped quietly at the edges, carrying the reflection of sky and memory. And in that moment, I felt her everywhere in the stillness, in the breeze, in the quiet hum of truth that outlives us all. It's been 25 years since Lillian Whitmore passed. Time has done what time always does, softened the edges, blurred the lines, but somehow sharpened the truth. I'm 50 now, though sometimes when I walk by the lake, I still feel like the boy who once mailed her that shaky letter about planting a tree. That tree still stands behind my house, tall and wide, its roots sunk deep into the soil, a living reminder that truth, like love, needs time to grow strong. Today, the world remembers her. The Whitmore Initiative has become something far larger than any of us dreamed. Dozens of centers now fill the country, from city schools to quiet mountain towns. Thousands of children have passed through their doors, each one carrying brushes, clay, or pencils, each one learning how to turn pain into creation. And today, we dedicate our newest and largest center, right here by Lake Elmer, where her story began and where it gently ended. The press is here, but it doesn't feel like a media event. It feels like a homecoming. Families gather by the water's edge. Teachers and students stand in quiet anticipation, and behind me, draped in white cloth, waits the final painting she left behind, the one we found tucked carefully inside the cabin after she was gone. I take a deep breath and step up to the podium. The crowd falls silent. I can see Judith's daughter in the front row, her hair silver now, her hands clasped like her mother's once were. And somewhere among them stands Vanessa, older, peaceful, her eyes proud as she watches her grown son. I smile gently before I begin. 25 years ago, a woman taught me that truth isn't about winning or losing. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of silence. The lake shimmers behind me, golden in the late afternoon light. She taught me that forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's what we do when we decide not to let pain decide who we become. She showed me that broken stories can still end with beauty. My voice wavers, but I steady it with a breath. Many of you know her name. Some of you were lucky enough to know her smile. But for those who didn't, let me tell you who Lillian Whitmore really was. I pause, letting the silence settle. She was a woman who lost everything: her husband's loyalty, her peace, her certainty in love, and yet she rebuilt her life from honesty. She turned her grief into a garden, her pain into paint, and her truth into a legacy that continues to give children hope today. She believed that art could heal, not because it changed the past, but because it gave us new ways to carry it. I gesture to the draped canvas beside me. Before she passed, she left behind one final painting untitled, unsigned, unfinished. Today we give it a name, just as she once gave us meaning. I reach for the cloth and pull it away slowly. Gasps ripple through the crowd. The painting is vast, luminous, a stretch of calm water reflecting a sky of pale gold and rose. Along the shore are faint silhouettes, children holding lanterns, their lights flickering softly across the lake's surface. And in the distance, sitting on the dock, is the figure of a woman. Her hair silver, her posture calm, watching. I smile through tears. She called this one What Remains After Truth. The audience stands in silence. Some wipe their eyes, others bow their heads. The only sound is the wind moving through the trees and the quiet lap of water against the shore. After the ceremony, people linger. They talk softly, take photographs, leave flowers by the dock. I stand near the painting, lost in its glow. Vanessa approaches, her movements slower now, but graceful. "She'd be proud of you, Samuel," she says quietly. "She always knew you'd carry this forward." I shake my head softly. She carried me first. She smiles, eyes glistening. We all carry pieces of her, I think. We stand there together, looking at the lake two people once bound by a lie, now joined by truth that outlasted both our mistakes. As evening falls, the guests leave one by one. I stay behind, walking down to the dock, the same place where Lillian used to sit every morning with her tea. The lilies bloom near the shore, white and serene, their scent carried on the breeze. I kneel by the edge and place a single lantern on the water. The flame wavers, then steadies, drifting toward the reflection of the stars. I whisper softly, "You did it, Miss Lillian. The world remembers." The lantern drifts farther out, its light merging with the sky's reflection until I can't tell where one ends and the other begins. In that moment, I understand what she meant when she wrote, "Truth is not a weapon, it's a light. It doesn't blind, it doesn't burn, it simply shines quiet, persistent, until it finds the next heart brave enough to hold it." I look back at the center, the windows glowing warm against the twilight. Children's laughter echoes faintly from inside, pure, unburdened, alive. And as I stand there, with a scent of lilies around me and the lake shimmering under the moon, I know that her story isn't over. It never really ended. It just became part of the water, part of the light that keeps returning year after year. It's been another 10 years. The lilies still bloom by the lake every spring. Their roots run deep now, spreading through the soil beneath the cabin, growing wilder each year, as if the earth itself remembers her. The world has changed louder, faster, more restless, but here, at Lake Elmer, time still listens. I've grown older too. My hair has grayed, my hands ache from years of painting. And yet, when I stand on the dock at dawn, I feel young again. Maybe because this place holds every version of me, the boy, the man, the student, the teacher, and maybe because I still feel her presence here not as a ghost, but as something quieter, a kind of peace that lingers where love once hurt. Every year on the anniversary of her passing, we host the Lillian Whitmore Art Fellowship. Hundreds of children gather here from across the country, each carrying a story of their own. Some paint grief, some paint hope, but all of them, in one way or another, paint truth. And every year, before the exhibition begins, I tell them her story. Not the scandal, not the funeral, not the betrayal, but the grace. I tell them about a woman who faced humiliation and heartbreak and still chose compassion over bitterness, who turned her pain into something that healed strangers she'd never meet, who believed that truth, no matter how painful, could be beautiful if it was carried with kindness. They always listen in silence, and then almost always someone asks, "Did she ever regret forgiving them?" And I smile because I know the answer. No, I tell them. Because forgiveness wasn't something she gave them. It was what she gave herself. When the ceremony ends and the last child leaves, I walk down to the dock with a single lily in hand. I set it gently on the water and watch it drift away. Across the lake, the reflection of the art center shimmers in the twilight. Inside, her final painting, What Remains, After Truth Still Hangs in the main hall. They say the light hits it differently each season, that new colors seem to appear depending on the hour, as if the painting is still alive, still changing. Maybe that's the truth of her legacy. It keeps breathing. Tonight, as I stand by the water, I can hear the soft rustle of wind through the trees. The sound reminds me of her voice, calm, steady, certain. Truth isn't meant to wound Samuel. It's meant to set you free. The sky above me glows faintly gold, the horizon blurring where light meets water. And for one long, quiet moment, everything feels as it did the day she first forgave, still, weightless, infinite. I close my eyes, and in the soft hush of evening, I whisper, "Good night, Miss Lillian." The lake ripples once, as if answering back, and then it stills a mirror holding her reflection forever.